Don Raphael held his breath. Carmen noticed the safe was open. He saw the exact moment she realized what she was looking at. But instead of stepping closer or peering inside, she did something completely unexpected. She backed away immediately, as if it burned too hot to approach. She looked around nervously, then picked up the phone and called Don Raphael's office. When his secretary answered, Carmen explained, worried, that Mr. Mendoza had left the safe open and might have forgotten to lock it before leaving. The secretary told her not to touch anything and to wait for his return. Carmen stood thinking for a few minutes. Then she made a decision that left Don Raphael speechless. She dragged a chair over, placed it in front of the safe, and sat down, not to stare at the money or take it, but to stand guard, Don Raphael could hardly believe his eyes. Carmen had chosen to protect his money. She sat with her back to the safe like a sentinel. Every so often she'd get up to clean another part of the house, but she always returned to check that everything was still secure. At lunchtime, she made herself a sandwich in the kitchen. Instead of eating comfortably at the table, she carried it back to the study and ate it while sitting in the chair facing the safe. Don Raphael grew more and more bewildered. Who was this Carmen Rodriguez? At 5 p.m. It said 5 p.m. The doorbell rang, a delivery driver with a package. Normally, Carmen would have answered it, but she told him through the intercom that the owner wasn't home and he should come back tomorrow. Don Raphael realized she was afraid to leave the safe unattended, even for the few minutes it would take to sign for a delivery. She was guarding his money like it was her own child. Half an hour later, Carmen received a phone call that made her cry. Don Raphael could only hear her side, but he understood there was serious trouble at home. Her parents were about to lose their store because they couldn't pay a 30,000 euro bank debt. Carmen sobbed as she explained she didn't have that kind of money and her salary wouldn't come close. Don Raphael saw her look around desperately, and for a moment her eyes landed on the open safe. This is it, he thought. Now she would do what everyone else had done. Even with the best intentions, desperation would drive her to the cash. But Carmen did something he never expected. She stood up, walked over to the safe, and closed it firmly. She spun the combination lock to make sure it was secure. Then she returned to her chair and continued crying quietly. Don Raphael realized she had just given up the chance to save her family rather than betray his trust, and he didn't even know who this extraordinary young woman really was. He sat frozen in front of the monitors, utterly shaken by what he had witnessed. In his 75 years, he had met thousands of people, but he had never seen anyone behave like Carmen. She had just sacrificed the opportunity to rescue her family rather than violate his trust. Carmen was still sitting in front of the now closed safe, tears streaming down her face as she stared at her phone. Don Raphael knew she was thinking about how to tell her parents she couldn't help them. That image pierced his heart. For the first time in years, he felt genuine emotion. He left his hiding place and walked to the front entrance, making noise as if he had just arrived home. Carmen rushed to greet him, eyes still red but trying to hide her distress. She immediately apologized about the safe, explaining she had found it open and had been afraid to leave it unprotected. Don Raphael asked if everything was okay, if anything had happened while he was gone. Carmen hesitated, forced a smile, and said everything was fine. He pressed, noticing she seemed upset, and finally she broke down. In tears, she told him about the call from her parents. Their little grocery store had been struggling for months. A new supermarket in town had cut their customers in half. Now the bank was threatening to foreclose because they couldn't pay the 30,000 euro debt. Carmen explained she had come to Madrid precisely to earn enough to help her family. But with her housekeeping salary and university expenses, she could only send 300 euros home each month. It would never be enough to save the store. Don Raphael listened in silence, his heart tightening more with every word. This young woman worked 18-hour days between classes and cleaning. She lived in a shared room with 3 other students. She ate sandwiches and plain pasta, all to support her family and chase her dream of a degree. Carmen apologized for crying in front of him, saying she didn't want to burden him with her personal problems. She would find a way, maybe a second job. Don Raphael was quiet for a few minutes, thinking. Then he said he needed to check something in his study and asked her to come with him. In the study, he walked to the safe and began entering the combination. Carmen immediately stepped back, explaining she didn't want to see the code in case it tempted her or anyone else. But he stopped her. And he explained that he had left the safe open on purpose that morning. It was a test he gave every employee to see who they really were. Every single one had failed. Carmen stared at him, stunned. Don Raphael told her that after years of betrayal, he had lost all faith in humanity. But what she had done that day had taught him something priceless. Honest people still existed. He opened the safe and took out an envelope containing 50,000 euros in cash. He handed it to her, saying she had earned it, not just for passing the test, but for restoring his faith in people. Carmen looked at the envelope without taking it, fresh tears rolling down her cheeks. She said she couldn't accept it. She hadn't done anything special. She had only done what was right. Don Raphael smiled for the first time in months. He told her that doing the right thing when no one is watching and when there's no reward, that is what makes it special. But what he was about to learn about Carmen would change his life forever. Carmen stared at the envelope, eyes full of tears, but still didn't take it. Don Raphael was puzzled. He had just offered her more than her parents earned in 2 years. Why was she still hesitating? She wiped her tears and looked him straight in the eye. She couldn't accept the money because it didn't belong to her in any way. She had only done her duty, and duty doesn't get paid. But there was something else she needed to tell him. With a trembling voice, Carmen began a story Don Raphael never saw coming. 2 years earlier, when she had first arrived in Madrid, she worked as a waitress in a downtown restaurant. One night, while clearing tables, she found a purse a customer had left behind. Inside were documents, credit cards, and 2,000 euros in cash. Carmen turned everything over to the owner so it could be returned. The next day, she learned the owner had kept the money, telling the customer the purse only contained the documents. That night, Carmen had cried for hours, not over the money she could have taken, but because she realized how cruel the world could be to honest people. She vowed she would never let others' greed change her. Don Raphael listened, fascinated. He was beginning to understand that Carmen wasn't just naturally honest. She had consciously chosen to remain so despite disappointment. Carmen went on to say that when she saw the open safe that morning, she immediately knew it was a test, not because she was especially clever, but because she had heard stories of wealthy people testing employees the same way. Don Raphael was speechless. Carmen had known from the start it was a test and had still acted with complete integrity. But she wasn't finished. With growing emotion, she revealed that she knew far more about Don Raphael than he realized. It hadn't been random that the agency suggested her for the job. She had specifically asked to work for him. Don Raphael was baffled. Why would she want to work for him in particular? Carmen went to her bag and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. It was an article from 3 years earlier about Don Raphael's donations to a children's hospital in Seville. The story explained that he had personally paid for medical treatments for 15 sick children, but asked to remain anonymous. Carmen told him one of those children was her cousin Paco. The boy had a heart defect that required an extremely expensive operation. The family couldn't afford it, and insurance didn't cover the experimental procedure. Then, out of nowhere, the hospital called to say an anonymous donor had covered all costs. The surgery was a complete success, and Paco was now a healthy, happy child. Carmen had learned the donor's identity by accident when a nurse let a document slip with Don Raphael's name on it. Since then, she had researched him and discovered he had been making anonymous donations for years to hospitals, schools, orphanages, and struggling families. That was why she wanted to work for him, not for money or opportunity, but because she wanted to meet the man who had saved her cousin's life. Neve, she wanted to understand what kind of person does good without expecting anything in return. Don Raphael was floored. For years, he had believed he was surrounded only by people who wanted his money. And here was a young woman who had sought him out because she admired his generosity. Carmen finished by saying that was why she couldn't accept his money. He had already done so much for her family by saving Paco. It wouldn't be right to take more. Don Raphael sat in silence for long minutes, absorbing everything he had heard. Then he did something that surprised them both. He began to cry. They were tears of relief, joy, and deep emotion. For the first time in years, he felt truly seen and valued for who he was, not what he owned. But Don Rafael also had a secret to share, something that would change Carmen's life forever. He dried his eyes and looked at her with an expression she had never seen before: tenderness, gratitude, and a profound decision. He asked her to sit because he had something very important to tell her. Don Rafael explained that the safe test wasn't just about exposing dishonest people. It was far deeper and more personal. At 75, he had no children. His brother had died 10 years earlier. His only relatives were the nephew and niece who cared only about his inheritance. For years, Don Rafael had been searching for someone to leave not just his money, but his values, his worldview, his commitment to helping others. He had tested dozens of people, employees, colleagues, even recipients of his donations, but everyone had failed. The safe test was the final exam to find his moral heir. He wasn't looking for someone who wouldn't steal his money. He was looking for someone worthy of carrying the responsibility of doing good in the world. He went on to explain that in recent years, he had created a charitable foundation that managed much of his wealth. The foundation helped families in need, funded medical research, and supported young talents like Carmen, but it needed someone trustworthy to lead it when he was gone. All the anonymous donations he had made over the years, including Paco's surgery, had come from that foundation. Now he needed someone who shared his vision to continue the work. Don Rafael stood, went to the safe, and pulled out a thick folder. He placed it on the desk in front of Carmen. It was his will, updated that very day after watching her behavior on the cameras. Carmen was now Don Rafael Mendoza's primary heir, not just of his fortune, but of the responsibility to run the foundation that helped thousands of people. It was an enormous responsibility, but Don Rafael was certain she was the right person. He added that he would, of course, immediately resolve her parents' store debt, not as payment for passing the test, but as the first act of their partnership. Carmen would continue her studies while beginning to learn how to manage the foundation. Carmen finally found her voice. She told him she was honored by his trust, but didn't feel qualified for such a huge responsibility. She was just a small-town student who knew nothing about managing large sums of money. Don Rafael smiled and said that was exactly why he had chosen her. People who thought they knew everything about money often forgot its true purpose. Carmen, who had always had little, understood how important every euro was and how it could change lives. With a trembling voice, Carmen accepted, not for the money or power, but because she understood Don Rafael was offering her the chance to make a difference in thousands of lives, just as he had done for Paco. He hugged her like a father hugs a daughter. For the first time in years, both felt they had found a family. 6 months later, Carmen's life had changed completely, but not in the way most people would imagine. She didn't live in luxury. She had found her purpose. Every morning, she got up at 6 to study. How? Afternoons were spent at the Mendoza Foundation offices, learning from Don Rafael how to turn money into hope. Her parents' store had been saved and was now thriving thanks to a foundation program supporting small rural businesses. Jose and Maria Rodriguez had no idea their rescue had come through their daughter. Carmen had asked Don Rafael to keep it anonymous even from them. Carmen graduated with honors in art history, but discovered her true passion was helping people. Under Don Rafael's guidance, she learned to evaluate charitable projects, manage donations, and create support programs for families in need. In those 6 months, the foundation had helped hundreds of families. Sick children receiving free treatment, talented students earning scholarships, lonely seniors getting assistance. Carmen realized every story was like hers, honest people facing hardship who just needed a chance. Don Rafael, meanwhile, had regained his joy for life. Watching Carmen grow in her role rekindled his own enthusiasm. He no longer felt like a lonely, bitter old man, but a mentor shaping his successor. Their relationship had become that of a grandfather and granddaughter. They lunched together daily, discussing philosophy, art, and the meaning of life. The once silent mansion in the Madrid hills had become a home full of life. One spring day, while reviewing the foundation's plans for the next year, Don Raphael said he had a confession. The safe test hadn't been the first time he observed her. 3 months before hiring her, he had hired a private investigator to follow her for a week. The report showed she always shared her food with poorer roommates, helped an elderly neighbor with groceries, and gave her savings to a classmate who needed medical tests. Don Raphael had known even then that she was special. The safe test was merely final confirmation of what he already suspected. He had found the moral heir he had been seeking for years. Carmen smiled, not upset about being watched, but touched that he had seen goodness in her before they even met. Don Raphael pulled one last document from the safe. It was a project he had dreamed of for years but never launched, a nationwide network of young people like Carmen, honest, determined individuals who would run regional charitable foundations. The project was called the Hope Network, and it would identify and train a new generation of philanthropists who shared their values. Carmen's eyes shone as she looked at it. It was perfect. Instead of concentrating power in one person, they would build a web of exceptional people bringing hope to every corner of Spain. That night, as they dined on the terrace overlooking the Madrid hills, Carmen reflected on the incredible journey that had taken her from a housekeeper guarding an open safe to a woman responsible for changing thousands of lives. Don Raphael's test had revealed far more than either of them imagined. It hadn't just uncovered Carmen's honesty, it had forged a bond that would bring hope to countless people who didn't even know they needed it. Don Raphael looked at Carmen and smiled as they gazed at the distant lights of Madrid. At 75, he felt immortal for the first time. His greatest legacy wasn't money or property, but the values he had passed to an extraordinary young woman who would carry them forward for generations. Carmen met his eyes. Without a word, they both knew they had found what they were looking for, a family built not on blood or self-interest, but on trust, respect, and a shared dream. The safe test was over, but their story together was just beginning.